I'm going to make an assumption, and we'll show a quick show of hands. I'm going to make an assumption that someone in here has experienced at some time a little bit of tension with someone that they work with. So we're going to talk today a little bit about this thing called cultural competency, and I know that the term is used a lot and people have different ideas about it. This morning, let's get right into it. Cultural competence. What does that mean? We kind of break it down into two kind of categories for us. One is about meeting them where they are. And you've heard people talk about this. Corey talked about this. You kind of heard this theme going around throughout the conference of meeting people where they are. What are the components of meeting people where they are? One of the components is becoming more knowledgeable of differences, more knowledgeable of different ways of doing things, more knowledgeable of different cultures. And if anyone has in your assignment gone into a new environment, you know there's a lot of things that you don't know about the people in that environment or the community or the cultural nuances. So becoming knowledgeable is a big piece of that. Sometimes we get a little uneasiness because we're thinking, that means I have to know everything there is to know about every culture out there. That's not the case. I'm a diversity practitioner, as we're called. I don't know everything there is to know about every culture out there. But what it does mean is that we're on a continuous learning process. And so I have to allow myself and open myself up to become a student at all times of someone else's ways of doing things or someone else's culture. And that's what the knowledgeable pieces are really all about. There's also this thing called being acceptable. Well, acceptable is saying I'm going to open myself up. I'm going to listen with that willingness to be influenced. I'm going to allow myself to see where they're coming from. And that's what that means, and less judgment in that process. Judging is really easy and becomes kind of our default. Then there's another piece called adaptable, and that's really saying, and I'm going to flex my way. Not necessarily changing your way, but simply flexing your way. As an example, I'm very analytical in the things that I do. I got a spreadsheet for everything. I have a list for everything. That's my style. But that style doesn't work for someone else who may have a style of being more expressive, right? And so if I want to get them on board with me, I'm not going to give them a spreadsheet and data. I'm just going to give them some highlights. We'll talk a little bit more, give you some more examples throughout the course of this conversation. The other half of cultural competency is about you. It's about how we show up. Right? How do I show up? What is my impact on others? And I have to become more conscious and oftentimes cautious of that impact that I'm having on others. Regardless of my intent, it's about what my impact is. And then there's another piece, and that is how I respond to diversity tension. At some point, within the midst of differences playing out in our relationships, we're going to have some tension. I'm not saying we're going to have tension on every difference that we experience, but somewhere in our experiences of relationships, we get some diversity tension. And the most important thing is how I respond. I'm going to give you some tips. Oh, somebody's with me on this, right? Okay. All right. I'm just saying. You can't just put the dishes in there and expect them to get clean. There's certain ways they go in there. And it's not my way. It's the product manual's suggested way for better cleaning purposes. All right. I'm going to assume by all of the conversation and the fact that you did not even want to stop your conversation that there's just a little bit of tension going on in your work environment. Just a little bit? All right. So it sounds like everyone had a story. I'd like to hear a couple of those stories. We don't have enough time for the fact that we should have been focusing in on how we get to the objectives. How do we get the best job done as opposed to whose way of getting the job done is the best. And that's what created the tension, right? Great. Okay. Absolutely. Right? So those were our conditioning ways of doing around differences, around experiencing that diversity tension. It's not really the difference, but it's the tension that we respond to that creates these challenges. So let's stop responding negatively to diversity tension. It's also about choosing a different dance in terms of how I show up and how I respond to tension. I'm going to put the phone down. Let me know when you're finished. Right? And like, well, that's not going to be fun. Exactly. My point here is, at any point in time, I can stop pointing my finger, regardless of what the other person does. I can stop pointing my finger, and this situation no longer exists. We're typically waiting for the other person to show up differently. A couple of things are playing out. One is that there were some expectations that they had of you, or you had of them. You probably did not have a conversation of those expectations, and therefore you did not come to agreement on those expectations. However, you still held the expectations. If I'm holding some expectations to you that you don't know about, there's a high probability that you're not going to meet the expectation, correct? And in that moment where you don't meet the expectation, I get some tension, I get conflict. Getting towards cultural competency, we don't show up with being more cultural competent tomorrow because you hung out with Darrell for an hour, right? Or you read a book, or you went on a website. It's a process. It's about valuing people. It's about meeting them where they are and seeking validity into different perspectives. And this is a continuous process. It's about understanding how I show up by challenging my beliefs, assumptions, and expectations of others. And it's about doing all of this with compassion, with that willingness to be influenced by what the person tells me and by the experiences that I have in these challenging situations and not running away from them. Thank you very much.